Today on InfoCheck, we draw on insights from PenPlusBytes Disinformation Index Report, a survey carried out in Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Burkina Faso and Mali, and speak to a former Senegalese parliamentarian to unpack how disinformation is weakening democracy and what can be done to restore trust. Dr. Ibrahima Sané, welcome to InfoCheck.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure having you.
My pleasure is mine.
Now, how do false narratives specifically damage public trust in parliament and courts?
I think it's a very deep question, this one, and it's not today's on. It's probably due to the way our communities and societies were ruled. There was a paramount chief, and his word was, because it's his and not hers, his word was always paramount and not discussed. And that power was inherited also, as he was not elected, and he probably will hand over to one of his kins if it's not his son, and so on and so forth. So it shows you that it's difficult for people to trust in the way elections are held in our countries. Very difficult to trust. And there's also this narrative from the Western world that in Africa it's only corruption. We have this reputation of having corrupt officials, corrupt governments, and also in the West we also have this reputation of having corrupt processes, electoral processes, and the Western world will send observers to us to see if the elections were fair. And we never send observers to elections in the US or in France or in Britain. They send observers to us to see if they are fair. So given this environment and all those narratives, as you say, it's difficult for people to trust the electoral process.
And why do you think, for example, countries in the African Union don't send observers to, let's say, European countries or North American countries to observe elections also and also give recommendations as they do to us?
What's the point? First of all, they don't have the funds. You have to fund all those operations. The West, they have the money. They can send people. And it'll be expensive to maintain a big group in all those Western countries when they have elections. And when you have so important needs, development needs in your own countries, do you give funds to such operations? No, I don't think you will. Secondly, I don't think they will even listen to you. I don't think African Union sending observers, those observers will even get listened to. So there's no point.
Now, in terms of you being a former parliamentarian, the parliaments in several African countries that have undergone elections recently have really come under a lot of criticisms. The parliament in Côte d'Ivoire, in Cameroon, in Tanzania, there's almost this belief that the executive is hijacking the role of the parliament. What do you make of this?
This is a big problem. Usually, you always have people who say the elections have been rigged. Whether it's true, and most of the times it's true, but even if it's not true, you will have opposition saying the elections have been rigged, because they know there will be people to believe them. Some people will believe them, always. The struggle for power doesn't always, in Africa, doesn't always follow an orthodox path. It's sometimes it's a stronger person. Hence the numerous coup d'etat. The military will come in, will say, no, I'm not staying. I'll hand over to a constitutional government and constitutional order. And then they end up staying. For years, sometimes decades, they stay. I mean, I can quote from Egypt to and they get elected to to all the Western countries here, some of the West African countries here, Mali, Niger, Burkina, you have Guinea, and you can bet that in Guinea, the president who staged the coup will be elected. I mean, it's clear. So, election in Africa seems to be a formality. You can tell who is going to win in most cases, and that's sad, because usually allegiances go to the person who is in power. And truly, I mean, if they don't need to rig the elections. The allegiances go to people in power, to the regime, because the regime can, I don't know, corrupt the people or do. If you have a kin in the regime, you usually vote for the regime because the kin is probably helping the family at large.
Now, there seems to be a lot of disinformation when it comes to parliament, and I have a personal opinion on that, because I think it's easier to blame a group of people, be they 100, be they 200, depending on the country in terms of the number of parliamentarians, than to actually blame the executive, which are much fewer, right? Do you think the parliament has been a scapegoat of bad governance in Africa? Do you think there is deliberate misinformation anytime it concerns the parliament? And why do you think, for example, when we have military dictators come into power, of course the first thing they are going to do is to suspend or dissolve the parliament, which is supposed to be the voice of the people? Is there a disconnect between parliament and the people, or do Africans just like seeing a strong man rather than a group of people?
No, well, look, I've been on this earth for quite some time now, so, and I've yet to see a country where the military took over and the people didn't support them. I've yet to see that. If you know an example, tell me that example. Whenever there is a government that's overthrown, the military support them, the people support them. So that's clear. Now, there is this distrust in Parliament because our parliaments do not, in most countries, play their real role. I'll give you the Senegalese constitution, which is probably the same as there. It's parliament that authorizes the president to act, government to act. Without a law, they cannot. But government can get all the laws they want passed because parliamentarians just obey the executive, because they are the ones who have the money and who make decisions and spending and allocate resources to your part of the country or whatever it is, who have projects in it. So parliamentarians tend to obey the executives, if not their parties, the party they belong to. And so it's not, they do not play their role. I was a parliamentarian in about 15 years ago or whatever, just over that. And what happened at the time was very simple. We had 8 people who had never sat in a school. They couldn't read the law we were voting in. I know, for instance, an interesting example in Niger. At that time in Niger, you couldn't be an MP if you were parliamentarian, if you hadn't gone to BEPC, we say that in French. That's probably upper 5th level or upper 6th, I couldn't tell you. So, but it's not the case in most African countries. You can go to parliament, get voted in, and yet, what do you say? I mean, you cannot read the laws you're voting on, and so you just vote because people tell you to vote. Simply, your party tells you to vote, or the government tells you to vote. Is that democracy? We need a critical mass of informed people on the issues that are being voted on. Do people read and try to understand the issues, what is at stake, I doubt that, I'm afraid. There's a lot of laziness around. I can testify to that. And people just don't look into those documents and what would be the consequences. They live the moment and they vote because they want the party to win. So I stay at the post where I am if the regime is still there. So why overthrow, vote against? The regime will fall and I'll lose all my privileges. So people just think like that. And if you call those elections or parliaments, I don't call those parliaments. And take the example of those 8 Democrats in the US who yesterday voted to end the shutdown in the United States. They thought of the country as well. Okay, they might detest President Trump, but they thought the country had suffered enough and that the shutdown should stop, and they voted for it. You can't do in our countries a thing like that. It's impossible.
It's going to be difficult not to talk about courts and security institutions also. Disinformation really is a thing when it comes to this too. Do you think that Africans generally misunderstand the role of security institutions and the courts, or do you think like maybe there is not enough education about the role the courts should play? And of course there is also the issue of the executive controlling and instrumentalizing the courts also against the people and the opposition. How do you think this can be sorted out?
Tough to sort that out really, because illiteracy plays a big role. Do people understand the role of courts, security forces? And do security forces themselves understand their role? I'm not certain. So it's going to be tough because, and I think we need to evolve a bit. We've come into the Western system of governance. We need to accept that we must learn first how the system works before we can be efficient. If the security forces wrongly arrest someone, then it's fair, people should protest. But it can be right for the security forces to arrest someone. And then they say, no, it's because the government doesn't like me, I'm an opponent, and things like that. So, disinformation, as you called it, is really a plague in Africa especially, because in Europe, people can make out the right from wrong. I mean, in here, you believe what you want to believe on, depending on your allegiance.
Dr. Ibrahima Sané, thank you for coming on InfoCheck.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you.
Disinformation thrives where trust fades. Rebuilding that trust means defending truth and transparency at every level. You've been listening to InfoCheck. I'm Francis Boniface. Stay critical and see you next time.